It is that time once again, a nice Saturday morning here at Awesemo.com, and we are ready to talk some college football live before lock. What is it, week 8, Matt? What is this? I can never remember.
Yes, sir, week 8.
Week 8, it's because they had a week 0. Highly confusing, but that doesn't matter. I am Ben Raza. I am joined, as I always am, by Matt Gajeski. We've got 12 games to break down. We've had a nice little warm-up. We had 4 games Thursday, 4 games last night. I assume you are ready and able to dive into this interesting Saturday slate.
I am ready, man. I'm really excited for today's games. I think a little less exciting than some we've seen recently, but overall still a really good spot.
No doubt about it. There's a lot of questions, some just weird games, honestly, that kind of ugly. There's some academy teams in the slate, and we're going to talk about all that. But before we do, our friends at PrizePicks sticking with us, sponsoring this show. I know you've done a ton of content leading up to this show about them. You've talked about some picks, but if you are unfamiliar with them, the daily prop-based contest over there, they want to get you started with a fantastic deposit bonus. All you're going to be doing, you're picking 2, 3, 4, 5 players available, and you're going to project, are they going over or under those scores? Kind of just like the props. And if you get, say, 5 right, you're going to get up to 10 extra entry fees. Different type of format. I really enjoy it. And it's not just college football. They've got NBA, they've got NFL, baseball until it's over soon enough, and obviously all the peripheral sports as well. Go to the App Store or Google Play and download. Make your first deposit using the promo code Awesemo to receive an instant first match deposit bonus of up to $100. There are so many options over there, Matt. One that I looked at, and you mentioned you got to get on these early because they do move. Blake Corum is rushing yards for Michigan. I think Michigan is going to run for like 300, 400 yards today style. I think that he has a chance to really go over. What did you make of the rushing yards props over on PrizePicks?
He was at 89 yesterday. I see him at 97.5 here. And I think you can still take the over. I have slight value towards that. He projects for 101.5 for me. So slight value there. But with Northwestern being so bad on defense, they're allowing about 245 yards per game to opposing rushers. Blake Corum could be in a situation where he doesn't really need a full workload to get there. It could be just off a few long runs, kind of like what we saw with Isaiah Spiller against Missouri last week. So that is one I still like.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And then there's guys like, I'm interested to see how long they let him go. But Caleb Williams should have a field day today. Will he throw more than 2.5 touchdowns? I mean, they're going to probably have upwards of 5, 8, 9 touchdowns to go around. He may not have his hand in all of them, but I do think you could look to him in the passing game. Any others that you want to highlight?
We just got some news coming out of Oklahoma that we're not going to see Mario Williams, and it looks like Mike Woods is also going to be out. One I was already on before those injuries was Jaden Hazelwood over 50.5 receiving yards. Oklahoma is predicted to just crush Kansas today. I don't know how they get it done, but trying to buy low on some of the cheaper props here. So Hazelwood at 50.5 receiving yards. That's one I like, particularly so now that they could see a little bit more condensed opportunity.
Yeah, you mentioned they are upwards of, they're 39-point favorites. So regardless of who plays on the outside, this is a pseudo bye week. They're going to rack up a ton of points against poor Kansas. So a lot there. We're going to be talking about them throughout the show, but absolutely go over. I know people that have tried this format, they really enjoy it. It's a different feel. You get good odds, and it's kind of really in line with what we're doing in terms of breaking down these players, finding those edges. So respect to PrizePicks for offering that each and every week. We've got 12 games here. We start with Kansas State and Texas Tech. It's a pick 'em, 60.5-point total. This is what I'm talking about on this slate. It's just, to me, this is like a weird game. I have no real feel on these teams. Kansas State is very methodical. They always slow the games down. Do they drag this game down enough where it makes both teams irrelevant, or do you see pieces that you might be interested in?
So the total is one of the better ones on the slate. We have a bunch of really bad totals today, and this one is one of the few above 60. That comes mainly from both teams having poor defenses. Kansas State's been bad against the pass, and then on the other side, Texas Tech, they've just been vulnerable in some spots overall. So interestingly, this might be a better game to target, even though people probably won't want to based on just name value alone. And then you run into the problem on today's slate where we just have really bad quarterbacks overall. A lot of the military academies in the slate, they're tough to play. So a guy like Skylar Thompson actually pops a little bit as a dual threat. And again, only 13 yards in the year this year. He's been hurt. He rushed for over 405 before getting hurt last year too. So he is mobile, somewhat efficient. It's low volume here, so he'll have to get it done with efficiency, but he's still just really cheap. And if you're looking for a cheap signal caller, I think he makes sense. There was a question in chat already about pairing Deuce Vaughn, the receiving back, with Skylar Thompson. I think that's very viable because Skylar Thompson's so cheap and Deuce Vaughn leads the team in targets. So I'm perfectly okay with that construction. Also, they have a good implied team total today. Normally, I would not be interested in that for teams that are very low volume, but Kansas State implied for 30 more points. I think you can play both of them together today, not only because of the receiving ability that Vaughn has, but their implied team total is very high. So it's a weird game. I'm actually more interested in this game than I thought I would be.
I mean, yeah, Texas Tech has provided major opportunities for teams to score a lot of points. And even a team like Kansas State, maybe we see that today. Talk about the Red Raiders themselves, though. They've had some injuries. You know, the Oregon transfer gets banged up. Columbia is in there now. Taj Brooks hasn't played. He's still porting a Q tag. What do we expect in terms of personnel and who's the guy to target?
Columbia's actually somewhat mobile. He runs a little bit, which I think is completely fine. And he has upside. It comes mainly from the style of offense he's going to be running there. But Kansas State's been pretty bad against the pass at times this year. Columbia has 2 games above 300 yards this year. He's more like your volatile quarterback where he could very easily be below 200 and then throw for over 300 in other spots. But he's completing 65% of his passes for 9 yards per attempt. So he's been pretty good. The team total here, again, is solid. And Columbia 6,300. I have a slight preference to him over Skylar Thompson. But in tournaments today, I'm only playing 5 quarterbacks, and 2 of them are in this game. So completely fine with getting to either of them. I also like that Columbia is pretty easy to stack. Azukanma and Geiger are the 2 options you're looking at. Both are, I think, somewhat efficiently priced, maybe a little overpriced. But again, not very many good stacking games today. So this is one I'm interested in. And Azukanma, Geiger are the 2 I'm going to look to stack with Columbia.
You mentioned real quick, 2 of the 5 quarterbacks. Are either of these guys possibly cash viable?
Yes, I think they're both cash viable.
What a world. It just shows the slate. It's got a weird breakdown of games, and that is certainly one of the more competitives. And the total, as you mentioned, it is north of 60, just slightly.
One of the things for cash, I'll just say really quick, is they price up a lot of the backs. So I do not think 4 running backs is going to be a popular build today. At least it shouldn't be. And then they price down some of these quarterbacks that are somewhat underwhelming, like Skylar Thompson and Columbia. They're really cheap. So they actually project a little bit better than the elite backs on like a price adjusted basis. So I think getting to one of them, whoever, and there's more cheap quarterbacks too. We'll talk about like Tagovailoa and stuff too, but that's the construction I'm looking at.
Fair enough. I mean, it does seem like this game has some opportunities to get back and forth. The next game, not going to be back and forth. Oklahoma's a 38.5 point favorite, 66.5 point total. That's all coming from their side of the ball. You know, we talk about this early in the season more often. How long will these guys go? Well, we see clearly they're being very cautious on the outside. You mentioned a couple guys that probably could go that aren't going to go. So what do we see? We've got Caleb Williams. We've got 2 running backs. We've got guys like Hazelwood. How do you prioritize a team that is going to be up, you know, many touchdowns?
Yeah, you definitely want to take stabs at them. They easily have the highest implied team total. If they blow out Kansas in this game, which they're expected to, their starters likely are going to have something to do with it. So I'm not just shying away from Oklahoma. I think you take stabs on them in tournaments. I think their quarterback is clearly the best play on the entire slate, assuming he's involved for a majority of the game. And he's active on both the ground and through the air. So he has just so many paths to paying off his salary, even though it's very high. And there's just a lack of options. With Corral hurt, there's not really another signal caller we feel good about on the entire slate. So Caleb Williams by default, I think, is going to be a popular play. Kennedy Brooks in the run game has separated himself from Eric Gray. I actually think Eric Gray probably gets some run today because of the blowout factor. So both are viable there. And then the receiving core looks to be a little bit narrowed with Hazelwood as the number 1. Marvin Mims is the number 2. Again, last week, Lincoln Riley put Marvin Mims back down to 50% of the snaps. So, and this week, I wouldn't expect him to play any more than that. So he's going to have to get there on his 3.5 targets per game. But Kansas is going to give you more opportunity than not to hit those big plays. So I'm just going to take stabs at Oklahoma. I think Caleb Williams is the best play on the slate at quarterback.
So obviously cash viable.
He's cash viable.
No doubt about it.
If Corral was healthy, it would be a debate, but we just don't know with Corral.
On the other side of the game, Kansas, I mean, what can you say? They did get a win this year. That was a long time ago, and it seems like it's going to be their only one. Is there anything to say about this team, or do you just don't mess around?
You're not messing around.
What a world. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to make a case, but I can't because it is Kansas. So stack up Oklahoma. I think we know that They're going to get a lot of run. And the interesting thing, friend of the show and friend of yours, Gavin, was saying, I don't know, and I agree with this. I don't know if they'll put Rattler in for mop-up duty. Like, that is kind of embarrassing. Maybe they'll go to a different quarterback, or maybe they'll just let Caleb Williams go the entire time.
If I was just thinking about this from like a hypothetical perspective, I think Caleb Williams would probably get more run than your average like starter in this spot, because he's only in his third game and they want to iron out these kinks before a potential playoff run. And Kansas is a great way to do that.
No doubt about it. These reps are actually pretty important for him. So good team of Oklahoma. We know that they're 38.5-point favorite. Kansas, not so much. Cincinnati, monster favorite as well, 28-point favorite. But the difference here, the total is just 48.5. So it shows you what you're going to get with Navy and with the ground game. And it's funny, all three service academies are playing undefeated teams today. Really, really strange situation there. This is the one that won't be knocked off. So talk to me about Cincinnati. Is it such a bad game environment because they're going against a triple option, or do you think that Ritter and these guys could still be tournament viable?
Yeah, they're just so efficient. They're going to score a lot of points, I think, no matter what. It's just predicting where it comes from. And Cincinnati's not going to pull their starters. They're trying to make their case for a playoff berth, and they need to just slaughter all their opponents from here on out to get there. Ritter has fallen victim to game script in basically every game this year. He hasn't been above 300 yards even a single time. They're not even using him as much as a mobile quarterback because they can just do so much on the ground. So Ritter's expensive. In blowouts, they will not hesitate to run, which is, I think, an issue for him and his ceiling. But if they do turn to the pass for whatever reason, and there's just an efficient passing attack here, he could be in play just because of their massive implied team total. They're right around 40, is just 4 touchdown favorites over Navy here. So it's similar to Oklahoma, where I think you want to take stabs at Cincinnati because their implied team total is just so high. I'm typically going to be doing that with Jerome Ford. He's the only one with a consistent workload on the team. And then in the receiving game, if you do stack Ritter, it's probably Alec Pierce, but he's just way too expensive for a guy averaging 5 targets per game.
It is a tough situation because, again, Navy's not going to throw the ball. They take so much time, and just look at the total, 48.5. So it feels like a game. And Cincinnati, credit to them, they have kept their foot on the gas. Style points are going to matter. I just don't know if there's a ton here because of the environment. Navy sporting the old 17% pass rate. That really, really hurts.
I think some people might be like coaxed into Navy quarterback plays. You need to treat them like running backs. And when you're playing a guy like Lavatai in your super flex spot, or the same with Christian Anderson for Army, you really need to think about the opportunity cost. You're foregoing a roster spot you could use on a high ceiling player, like one of the better quarterbacks on the slate. I think like Skylar Thompson and Columbi are significantly better plays than Lavatai and Christian Anderson here. They would need to be much cheaper for me to consider them.
Anything else from this game?
I don't think so. Navy uses their quarterback as their leading rusher, and the fact that you need to use a super flex to get that or a quarterback spot, just not worth it.
True. I mean, I think well said. Another ugly game. There's a lot on this slate that's one team just really, really out of play. And I think this might be the situation here. We got Northwestern, 23.5-point underdogs going into Ann Arbor. Again, 51-point total. Really, really pedestrian. Let's start with Northwestern. We'll get them out of the way. Going against Michigan's defense, which has been very impressive, and with how dysfunctional they are, is there anyone on this team worth mentioning?
Yeah, there's a couple guys worth mentioning. Northwestern's playing very fast, and they have a high pass rate. So at the very least, I think you could look to them as a run back if you're playing like a Blake Corum or a Hassan Haskins. But in the run game, they're going to use 2 guys. Evan Hall and Andrew Clare are the 2 main beneficiaries there. Really tough matchup for them, and prices aren't fantastic there. In the receiving game, Bryce Kurtz is out, so it narrows opportunities for Stephon Robinson, the Kansas transfer, and Malik Washington. I think they're both middling plays just based on pure volume.
The problem with this team, they do play fast, and that maybe I'm hoping they do, because I bet Michigan 20. I laid the 23.5. I think they really, really open it up here, and it's certainly not going to be with the passing attack. It's going to be on the ground. Northwestern is giving up almost 6 yards per carry. That's bottom like 5 to 10, 124th in the country. Michigan only wants to run the ball. So what do we do with that? Are there multiple Michigan backs in play, or is it going to be spread around too much to target?
They're both firmly in play. They both project really well. They both have essentially a 50-50 workload. And the only time Corum really separates himself is in competitive games. They'll try to spell him a little bit more in these massive blowout spots. So I do think Hassan Haskins is extremely involved. I think Corum's going to be significantly more owned. So in tournaments, you can make a nice pivot with Haskins, but they both just project extremely well here with the matchup. You can play them both pretty confidently. And I think Corum's he's considerable in cash. I'm probably not going to do that just because he is in the timeshare, but I think that's how good of a play he is. You might even consider him in cash.
Anything on the outside, Johnson, Baldwin, they're a little thin out there, but it just seems like a game where they truly are not going to need to throw much.
They just won't throw it all in games that aren't competitive. Their pass rate is 125th in the country. It's not worth targeting.
They are going to cover though. Just do it.
I bet them too, man. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I think that they really are. I was impressed with, I know it sounds stupid, but I actually was really impressed with Michigan against some of the MAC opponents. Like they turned it on. They won those games going away. Northwestern is just as good or bad as those teams. So I expect a big lopsided victory for Michigan today. Expect a big lopsided victory for Penn State today. They are a 24-point favorite at home, 45.5-point total. This is the theme of the show so far. I'm going to probably ask it a couple more times. Is there anyone on Illinois who's really struggled lately worth targeting?
Maybe Isaiah Washington, their receiver, but again, he's going to just have to get there on pure volume. There's just not much to like about Illinois. They don't have a clear starting quarterback right now. They refuse to name one, not that it matters. They're using a timeshare running back between Chase Brown and Josh McCray. And then Isaiah Williams, he's averaging 7.7 targets per game, but only 42 yards. So it's just really inefficient. And you're hoping maybe he scores a touchdown or gets a long run. And at his price, 3,700, I think there's better cheap options, which we'll get to on this slate. So Illinois is a pass for me.
On the other side, Penn State's a team, tough loss at Iowa. That was a rough game for them. The Clifford situation. Where does this team stand? They are at home. How do you think they attack what is an overmatched Illinois team?
I think they probably just try to run against him. There's a very real chance they're down Sean Clifford. From my understanding, he practiced twice this week in very limited fashion. They're going through warmups right now without pads, and Clifford's throwing, but that's not really indicative whether he plays or not. I think there's a very strong chance you see the backups here, which could just tank their efficiency. But I will say there's still 3 touchdown favorites in this game, even with their backup slated to start. So it kind of just speaks to the quality of Illinois this year. Taquan Roberson, if he does draw the start, he would be the guy I would expect to. He's a dual threat. He's not really that cheap on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, maybe you could use him. I'm probably not going to get there because they might even split reps here. In the backfield, they're using 4 players, and we have Lovett and Ford warming up today. So if it's a 4-way committee, not worth it. I think Jahan Dotson, extremely targeted when Clifford's out there. Just not sure what the passing attack looks like if Clifford sits. And I think there's even a chance like Clifford, if he does play, comes out at halftime or something if this game is in check. They just don't really need to use him. So Penn State really tough to get to despite their good implied team total.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of going with it. 24-point favorites, but in some ways, there's really no clear situation. If Clifford plays, he may be, geared down pretty quickly. I worry about Dotson a little bit if it's Roberson in there. It's not like he's not going to get any work, but again, this guy, he can move on the ground. They've got a number of backs, and Illinois is bad. They might be the worst team in the Big Ten.
They're up there close for sure.
It's bad. I think Penn State.
I think they lose to Rutgers if they play.
Oh yeah, I think they would be underdog. And honestly, I thought Minnesota was the worst team in the Big Ten. They're not. They're better than I thought. Somehow, very, very disturbing. But this could be ugly regardless of who plays for Penn State. I think this is one of the throwaway games, and it does have, one of the worst totals on the board here.
It does. I think if you're getting to a Penn State player, it's just in tournaments because of the total, but I'm not doing it.
All right, let's keep it moving. I know we got some questions in chat. We'll try to get to some of these guys. Ooh, interesting. Taj Brooks is warming up. Does that matter to you?
Yeah, it does. It's going to make Texas Tech a 3-way committee.
But it doesn't. Does that affect what you would do with the Texas Tech quarterback?
No.
Okay. Just want to make sure. All right. Now we're getting somewhere. Wake Forest, undefeated Wake Forest, 3-point favorites going into West Point to take on Army, 52.5-point total. Weird game. Feels trappy. And I do think there's a serious threat to Wake Forest here. Contrasting styles. So let's start with Wake. They want to play fast. They're going to throw the ball. They've got Hartman. They've got Beal Smith in the backfield. They've got serious weapons on the outside. I assume you like this offense, but the game environment, and we'll talk about it, worries me.
Worries me too. You could see their play volume a little bit depressed, and they're 12th in the country in just overall plays run. Sam Hartman is a great quarterback. He's somewhat mobile. He's very efficient. Wake Forest is just extremely sensitive to game scripts. So if they're winning in games, they're just flat out not going to use Hartman, which makes him very volatile. But again, this game is projected a little closer than I initially thought it would be, suggesting that Army keeps it close. So Hartman viable in tournaments, I think, really easy to stack. Jacare Roberson is cheaper than A.T. Perry, which is just a flat out pricing error by DraftKings. He should be more expensive, averages more receiving yards and more targets, but that could make Perry contrarian. Taylor Morin's the clear wide receiver 3 if you're getting deep there. And then when games are close, Christian Beal-Smith does somewhat pull away from Christian Turner and Justice Ellison. When games are out of hand, they'll run 3 backs more. But we saw Christian Beal-Smith in a competitive game last week easily outsnap those 2 and outcarry them. So he would be the guy I look to in GPPs. But overall, the timeshares and the volatile nature of Wake Forest make it a little difficult to target. And then it's obviously a low total playing a military academy.
Someone like Christian Beal-Smith on PrizePicks, his rushing yards at 62.5. I mean, if they consolidate a little in terms of the touches in the backfield, do you have a play on a number like that?
I think it would be over or pass.
I would agree. I mean, I do worry though about do you think this team, we saw Syracuse rack up a ton of yards against this defense, and we're going to get to the Army attack in a second. Do you think Wake can function if it is a more methodical game, or do you think that the tempo and the number of plays is really what they need to be efficient?
I think they can be efficient. They've been very efficient through the pass game in particular. Hartman's averaging nearly 9 yards per attempt, and he's just got 2 stud receivers out there. So I think even if Army gets up in the game, it's not a situation where Wake Forest is going to be toast trying to come back from behind. They certainly are poised to do that if they need to. The thing with Army is like they're just low play volume adds a lot of volatility into games. So I think when opponents are also up tempo, it helps Wake Forest. I don't know if it makes a huge difference, but I do think Army's tempo could make just the game a little more volatile.
Army is throwing the ball at a crisp 9% pass rate. They don't need to throw, and they're a good team. They seemingly always get against these ranked opponents, and they're always very competitive, but they never win the game. We saw them play Wisconsin last week, very, very close, but they are back at home here. They have beaten a up-tempo passing attack this year in Western Kentucky. I actually think Western Kentucky is a really good team. I know it doesn't look impressive. So talk to me about this team. Another one, their quarterback is basically a running back. Is there anything to target? Because Wake Forest right now has really struggled all year to stop the run, 94th in the country in rushing yards allowed per attempt.
Yeah, they have. It's just going to be Army's not like your typical rushing attack. Like Wake Forest doesn't have to dedicate anything to the pass. So do they improve based on that? And I'm not sure. Army's been very good. You mentioned this year, especially on defense is where I want to highlight. They, like you mentioned, playing Western Kentucky, people might kind of write that off, but you absolutely should not. Western Kentucky is a phenomenal passing attack under Bailey Zappi. So from a DFS perspective, Army's very difficult to get to. At the quarterback position, it's the same as Navy. You can't really target these guys because of opportunity cost. And the Army quarterbacks are even worse because they're both over 7K. And Christian Anderson is slated to start today. They don't use a clear running back. They will split their fullback carries, and then they use 4 slot backs. So really tough to get to anyone on Army.
Oh, yeah, it's a tough DFS game. In the betting market, I was hoping that this would be a little higher. I do think Army's still going to win this game. I think they're going to cause a lot of problems. It is true that Wake has prepared. They're off a bye. Georgia Tech is not in the ACC anymore in the sense of the triple option style. I just wonder if they'll be ready for this type of attack. Long, methodical drives. Wake is undefeated in record, and I have backed them in a lot of spots, but they're one of the teams, and you always bring this up. You know, it's like Oklahoma State. They're winning all these games by a field goal. Louisville, Syracuse, they're very close to having a couple losses on this resume.
Yeah, it's funny. Oklahoma State's the first touchdown underdog for a top 10 team since 1998.
Yeah, because they're no good, and they'll probably win outright as they seemingly do every week when I short them. You could thank Texas for that. All right, here we go. Your boys made the slate. Wisco, 3.5-point favorites at Purdue, 40.5-point total. Real good. Go ahead. Just talk about your guys. You beat Army last week. You must be feeling good. Now you take on a Purdue team that's coming off a really impressive win against Iowa.
Yeah, Wisconsin, just really hard to back in DFS at all. They're such a run-heavy team. Their plays per game, they're sitting at 35th in the country, which is purely elevated by that crazy Penn State game we saw in week 1 where they ran over 90 plays. They've been well below that lately. Mertz isn't someone you can target. He has negative rushing yards, which he needs to overcome passing. And he's only gone above 200 yards once this year. He's a disaster. Makes him really hard to stack too. The only thing I'll say about the receivers is they're cheap. Kendrick Pryor like kind of pops based on PPR value, but not worth getting to in my opinion down there. No upside. The running backs, they have sort of moved on from Ches Malusi as the bell cow, and now they're using a 2-back system with their freshman Braylon Allen, who's like this massive explosive back. And he just ran laps around Malusi last week. So there's a chance that Allen emerges as their lead back at some point this year. They're going to be running the ball a ton, which makes these guys GPP options, but I would much rather play Wisconsin back in a condensed opportunity. The 2-back system kind of renders them difficult to target, but if I was playing one, it would be Braylon Allen.
Anything on with Pryor or Davis on the outside?
Pass.
On the other side, Purdue, you were on it. I gave up. I knew Iowa was no good, and I gave up like a fool. You bet Purdue. They were able to, I mean, it's an upset, there's no doubt, but it just showed that Iowa wasn't a serious contender. Where do we go from here, though? Obviously, Wisconsin, the one thing they do have is a pretty strong defense at times. You've got a guy like King Doru in the backfield. You've got David Bell, who's a true alpha on the outside. Is it good players, just bad game environment, or can they supersede that?
So they have kind of the makings of a team that could be good. They're still lacking in the Big Ten. I like what Jeff Brom has done for them. They're the only team in the Big Ten West that's pass heavy and up tempo. And like what we saw with Iowa last week, Iowa just struggles to play when they're down in games. Wisconsin's the same. So I think it's dependent on Purdue getting an early lead. Otherwise, I think if Wisconsin can kind of impose their will, it's going to be difficult for Purdue. But Purdue does a couple things really well that's going to give Wisconsin problems. George Karlaftis is a phenomenal pass rusher, and Wisconsin has not been able to pass block. So that's a matchup to really watch. And then Wisconsin's weakness on defense, if they have one, their defense is very good, is through the air, which is what you're going to see Purdue try to take advantage of. O'Connell for DFS is another hard play because he's such a non-mobile quarterback. He has negative 48 rushing yards on the year, and he hasn't even started every single game. So he's basically dependent on a 300-yard performance to hit a ceiling. And we've seen it lately, but this is going to be his toughest game yet, I think. For what it's worth, he has gone over 300 yards in back-to-back games. In the running game, Xander Horvath is out, and they've been using King Doru as just a pure bell cow. I think he's somewhat viable as a cheap option here. He's going to catch passes when they're down. He's a good pass catcher. And there's just a lot of volume for a guy that's 4,900. David Bell is a good receiver, but again, really tough matchup here. If you're paying up for one, he would be the guy I would try to get to. He's averaging 134 yards, 10.2 targets per game. It's just a really bad receiver slate. So more often than not in my lineups, it's going to be stars and scrubs, with the scrubs being receivers and the studs being running backs. But if you are paying up for one, David Bell is a great volume.
Any of these guys worth potentially getting into a cash lineup?
Jackson Anthrop is the stone min. He's averaging 5.2 targets per game. If you're punting, I don't think he's a preferred cash play, but he's viable.
That's a perfect segment or segue to some of these questions. We had a lot of people in chat asking about punt receivers. So you just mentioned a guy there at the flat min. That leads
5.2 targets per game at the flat min.
You like Purdue in the game?
Yes.
I feel like a lot of people on that. I have not bet this game. It would be Purdue or pass for me, but I have a feeling it's going to end up in the pass category. But anything else to say before we mercifully move on from the Big Ten?
I don't think so. I think we got everything from this game.
Thank God. All right. Here we go. Oklahoma State. They are a 7-point dog. They're going into Iowa State. Take on the Cyclones. 47-point total. Oklahoma State is undefeated again. They find ways to win these games. I thought Texas had them dead to rights. Then you look up and they win by 8. They beat Boise State by 1 point, beat Baylor by 10, beat Tulsa by 5. It's just a very survive and advance style spot. I think it ends today pretty comfortably, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's start with this team. Spencer Sanders, Jaylen Warren, who is carrying a Chuba-like workload here. Do you see that changing today, or do you think that it's going to be more the same with the ground attack?
The only reason it could change is if they get down in the game, which they're projected to do so. Warren is a good pass catcher, so I'm not super worried about him. He should be very active in the pass game either way. They just have a 20-point implied team total, so he is somewhat of an opportunity cost play. There's about 5 or 6 really good expensive backs that I'm interested in. Warren enters more the GPP category because of that implied total, but you can't really knock him. His volume is just elite.
I mean, volume is everything, and they give this guy the ball a lot. There's no doubt about it. Oklahoma State's been a tough team because a lot of guys have been hurt on the outside. You've got the former Washington State player there and Tay Martin. Do you look to anything besides the backfield here against an Iowa State team that I know they're not what I thought they were, but I still respect this team?
So I have a little bit of Brock Purdy today. He is one of my 5 quarterbacks.
Oh, yeah.
And he is the one I have the least of, but I got a little bit of Rashad Owens in run backs because he's super cheap. There is a situation where I could see myself playing more Rashad Owens if we get some injury news in the late slate, the 2:30 slate or 3:30, depending on where you are in the country. I'm in Central Time, but there's some injuries in the late games, and Rashad Owens is a good pivot if some of those don't work out the way we're expecting. That's going to be Braylon Sanders and Thomas for LSU.
All right. So you mentioned Brock Purdy here. When you go to him, are you going to Hutchinson? Are you going to Charlie Kohler? Are you running him alone? How do you kind of anticipate building those Iowa State lineups?
He is mobile, and I think he has been more mobile in the past. They are throwing the ball a little bit more with him, and they're just riding Breece Hall. I only have a couple Brock Purdy lineups, and in every one of them, he's stacked with Charlie Kohler. And that's because Kohler missed their first game. His stats are a little bit depressed, but when you look at the last 4, he's right on par basically with Hutchinson. There's just not a strong case to be made that he should be $1,500 cheaper. So those are my stacks of this game. I have a couple Brock Purdy to Kohler stacks. The run backs are purely Rashad Owens and Jalen Warren.
I know you talked a little about Breece Hall. He's $11,000 over on FanDuel. Is that just too much? Or do you say not a lot of people are going to build like that and I could actually leverage?
You can do whatever you want on FanDuel. If you want to play Breece Hall, play him. FanDuel is really soft.
Shocking.
Like the opportunity cost on DraftKings is more drastic. He's very expensive there compared to some other bell cow backs. But he essentially has the same workload as Jalen Warren on the other side, but he has 7 points more in implied team total. I think that's somewhat mitigated by his price, but I did get a little bit of Breece Hall just in some stars and scrubs lineups. I have Breece Hall, but he's not like in game stacks. He's just a one-off.
Just a one-off. I have no problem with that. We got a lot of people. Like I said, I know this isn't the best slate. It's nice to see everyone sticking with us, powering the show through. If you can hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We are marching towards 63,000 subs on the Awesemo DFS channel. We had a question, not even a question, a comment from J-Dog in chat. Over 47 points in this game. I want to hear your thoughts about that. And if you do like betting content, of course, if you haven't been to the Awesemo Odds channel, make sure you go over there and hit that subscribe button, support the team, me, Matt, everyone talking betting content, betting you our Awesemo podcast exclusive college football content in the betting markets. Do you have a lean on this total at 47?
I don't. If I were taking it, it'd probably be over. Oklahoma State plays really up tempo. They're just run heavy. Iowa State's balanced, but both defenses are good. So it's a stay away from me. If I was handicapping it, I would go over.
Did you bet this game?
I did not.
Okay.
I am not going to.
I'm probably not either. I think I would be on the Iowa State side. It seems like everyone's on the Oklahoma State side. I get why. Iowa State, maybe I'm just still, wearing rose-colored glasses. There were a couple of jackass fumbles away from being undefeated still. They gave a couple games away, and there's no excuse. You shouldn't be losing to Baylor and honestly Iowa at home, but I still think the core of this team remains intact. If Oklahoma State gets through this, that would be their most impressive win to date, in my opinion.
I agree. Oklahoma State hasn't played anyone yet. This is their toughest game.
Yeah. And I don't see that happening for what it's worth. All right. Let's keep it going here. We'll have some time for questions. We did have just a quick question. You may have answered it, but cash wide receiver, 3,900.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
I would say tentatively Neighbors for LSU, but he's somewhat dependent on like Brandon Thomas's status.
Well, let's talk about him. Let's talk about LSU. They have taken some money. That's probably because of the Corral news. This was at 9.5 most of the week. It's down to 7.5. Going against Mississippi, 76.5 point total. We're both on the under in that. I will let you guys know that. And our betting picks actually have been posted on the site free today. If you want to see the cards, we're going to be doing some fun stuff with that in the future. This is kind of a beta test this week, but in the future, stay tuned because I know a lot of people want to know, what are you and me betting? Oh, we're going to provide that to you guys as part of the package. No doubt about it. You mentioned to me on the podcast, though, this LSU team that could not run the ball at all they flipped the light switch and they became a run heavy team last week against Florida. Davis Price had 36 carries for 287 yards and 3 touchdowns. I'm not going to ask, is he going to do that? But do you expect more of the same in terms of the rushing volume?
I think they're going to try based on the success they've had. For reference, their pass rate on the season is 56%, but then in the last 2 games, it's dropped all the way down to 35%. You run into a couple issues with that approach here. One, Ole Miss is still over a touchdown favorite in this game. So if LSU does get down, they'll just naturally be forced into more throwing. And then with Tyrion Davis Price, I mean, we're just dealing with such a small sample here. It could very easily correct back the other way. But I think we have seen kind of a new offensive philosophy from LSU. Price is fairly expensive for his role right now. I still think I would rather get up to the low 7K backs, but he is in play for tournaments. I have a lot of this game overall, so he's firmly in my player pool, playing a decent amount of him. At 6,600, I think he's fine.
What does that leave the passing attack? I mean, you mentioned the pass rate has dropped. If they fall behind or if it's rendered ineffective, do you think that these receivers can get in play? I know they're using a cast of characters here. You mentioned Neighbors. Is Max Johnson in play for you?
Yeah, he's one of my 5. Again, just a really high total in the game. It's at 76. Johnson's mobile, and he has been very pass heavy. This offense overall has. So if they get down in this game, volume should be there for him. Again, he's not my most owned quarterback, but I do have some of him. He's also extremely easy to stack because of all the injuries to their pass catchers. No Boutte. So you have Jaray Jenkins, just way too expensive. He had the multi-touchdown game on 4 targets last week. But their 3 main receivers, I think, are going to be Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, and then their tight end sort of hybrid receiver, Jack Beck. But Thomas had the most upside. He's questionable for this game. He left in the 3rd quarter, but he was functioning as their wide receiver 1. After he went down, Malik Neighbors actually led the team in targets in their last game. And if we're expecting a pass heavier approach, Neighbors at 3,700 could be worth a look. I like that he's so close in price to Thomas. So you can honestly just flip flop between them. If Thomas is out, it's a really easy pivot down to Neighbors if you decide to play Thomas. Beck is a little more expensive. Didn't get a ton of him. He's more of a FanDuel play, in my opinion, where he's cheaper than Neighbors. But on DraftKings, I'd be leaning towards Thomas and Neighbors.
Something you mentioned last week, and it did get there. It's kind of a ridiculous prop, but who cares? If we can cash it, we can cash it on PrizePicks. Max Johnson rushing yards is at 3.5 today. I know he could take some sacks, but do you think he ultimately will get north of that?
Yeah, he averages above that per game. Like it's not as good as it was last week, but it's still pretty good.
Tyrion Davis Price is at 94.5 yards. Now, if he gets 30 carries, it's hard not to get there, but do you have any feel on how effective he'll be?
I would lean under, but again, it's tough because Ole Miss is so bad at run defense anyway. They're allowing 215 yards per game. A lot of that came against Alabama for what it's worth. But if he struggles at all with efficiency or they get down in this game, he's not going to see that volume. So he would be a guy I lean under on.
This isn't even on the slate, but a bonus one. Jack Cohn, -4.5 rushing yards.
He's on FanDuel. He's on the FanDuel slate.
Do you think he can just get 0 rushing yards today?
Yeah, he's not mobile.
He's
hurt.
That makes it even more difficult. Speaking of hurt, Matt Corral, you know why he's hurt? Because they went with the YOLO strategy, 30 carries for Matt Corral last week for 195 yards on the ground. It was ridiculous. The game lasted 5 hours. I was delirious by the end of it. They threw golf balls onto the field. Joe Milton ran out of bounds instead of trying to win the game. The game had literally everything. But now Ole Miss is home. We don't know. It looks like Matt Corral is possibly trending towards playing. Do you have any inkling on what happens and how do you deal with a situation like this?
It looks like he is. Corral, I think he could suffer from a few things even if he does play. The total's really high in this game, so Corral needs to be in play no matter what. But he's certainly banged up, and I don't think he sees 30 carries again. I mean, you never really know, but if he has reduced rushing output, that hurts him. This team has really embraced the run in recent weeks. They're actually 104th in pass rate. I think that also has to do with losing Jonathan Mingo, and they lost Braylon Sanders in the 1st quarter in their last game. He did not return. You are not going to get good injury updates out of Lane Kiffin. So I'm not even 100% sure Corral starts this game yet. It seems to be trending that way, but I'm just not certain. And I'm currently not expecting Braylon Sanders to play, but that's a name to monitor. We're just not going to find out till pregame warmups on his status. But Corral would be your GPB pivot off Caleb Williams. People probably aren't going to get to him because of the injury.
If he doesn't play, what happens to Drummond? Do you think that the freshman can get him the ball in any sizable way, or does it just really hurt the passing attack?
Corral hasn't even been getting him the ball. They're just running the ball so much. His targets have absolutely plummeted since the Mingo thing. Like, they're just running the ball so much. And we talked about the 40% run rate on the year. That's even elevated based on like their last 4 games. So, I mean, Drummond's averaging 5 targets per game in their last 4. He's too expensive.
What do you do with the backfield then? Is it possible they adopt a more run heavy approach? They're not, you say this all the time and it's true. Ole Miss doesn't throw the ball an abnormal amount of the time. They actually have a pretty staunch running attack. It's just a lot of guys in that backfield. What do you do about that?
Yeah, they use 3 guys in Henry Parrish, Snoop Connor, and Jerry and Ely. And then Corral is so involved as a rusher too. It's really like a 4-way committee there, which is why we usually prioritize Corral. The injury makes it a little more difficult to target today. But overall, I think the best price adjusted play is Parrish based on his role in the pass game. Snoop Connor is a little bit more of a banger. He has more touchdown upside as a bigger back. But with Ely coming to return to this offense, I think you could see that reduce a little bit here too. They basically split this evenly 3 ways, making it just complete dart throw territory. I think if you're really targeting Ole Miss today, which you should be, their team totals above 40, you're looking at some value receivers. Again, watch the status of Braylon Sanders, but Ja'Cour Pearson's been working as their wide receiver 2, 5 targets in their last game, over 80% of the routes. He's 3,200, very much in play for cash, just based on price. And then their wide receiver 3 last week was Danish Jackson. He ran a route on a majority of dropbacks, only saw 2 targets, but again, he's 3,800. Very cheap options for Ole Miss. Again, I prefer Pearson over Jackson. He should function as the wide receiver 2 or the wide receiver 3 if Sanders does play. I'm not expecting it, but it could happen. So Pearson very much in play as a cheap punt.
A couple quick things from back in the show here. It looks like Clifford is going to be the starter for Penn State. Kayvon Lee starting at running back for Penn State. Any surprise there? Anything that rattles what you want to do?
No, not much. Clifford projects really well, but he's very volatile. I'm not going to be playing him. And then in the backfield, they're going to use 4 guys.
Quick question. DK Cash, Parrish or Malusi?
I wouldn't play either, but if you forced me to, I'd probably play Parrish.
Yeah, you're forced.
Parrish.
No choice. Okay, Parrish it is. All right, this is apparently, I woke up, I was wondering where College Game Day was going to be because it's just a gruesome schedule. They're in UCLA. I don't know how they let them get this game. Oregon and UCLA, Bruins are a 1-point favorite, 16.5-point total. Verdell goes down. They still find a way to get past Cal at home. I don't know if that's exactly impressive. You've got Anthony Brown. I assume he's not one of your 5 quarterbacks. What does interest you from the Oregon side?
No, he's not. He's a game manager, and he's just too expensive. Really limited as a rusher. Also extremely limited as a passer. He hasn't thrown for more than 244 yards in any game this year. He's only been above 200 in half of his games, so just a low ceiling. The total is good in the game, but I would much rather target this game on the ground. Also, kind of exacerbating these problems, Oregon is extremely hard to stack. They run 5 to 6 receivers in any given slate. I think Jalen Redd's the wide receiver 1, followed by Devon Williams and Micah Pittman, but none of them are playing a full complement of snaps. The only player that's really worth targeting, in my opinion, is Travis Dye, who's seen an enormous workload since CJ Verdell went down. They haven't used their backups really whatsoever, and Dye has been very efficient. I like that he's a phenomenal receiver. He gives you 25 yards purely through the air, 88 on the ground, and those numbers are already depressed by the fact that he's been playing alongside Verdell. So Dye just been very efficient. The one wrinkle here that could hurt him is UCLA plays good run defense, but with the volume being there for Dye, more than comfortable getting to him.
On the other side, UCLA, they take down LSU. It looked very, very impressive. Now we realize LSU is just not that good. They've got Charbonnet in the backfield. They've got some guys. Obviously, they've got DTR. Where is he in your quarterback rankings today? And where does this UCLA team fall amongst the 24 on the slate?
DTR is a little bit ahead of Anthony Brown for me, but he is pretty expensive overall at 8,100. He has some of the same issues as Anthony Brown, just not quite as bad. And he gives you more upside as a rusher, which is something I like here too. And I mean, he hasn't hit 300 yards either this year, but he's been above 200 in 4 games. Oregon's pass defense hasn't been great. So I just think slightly better matchup for DTR, better rushing ability, but still not a preferred play in my opinion. He's a little easier to stack too. Kyle Phillips, who is questionable for the game, he practiced, so I'm expecting him to be out there. And Greg Dulcich, they're the two options that are very clearly ahead of the rest. But similar to Oregon, I think you can attack this game on the ground with Charbonnet, who has fully usurped Britton Brown as the lead back now. It hasn't even really been close, and the gap just continues to widen week over week. Charbonnet is very cheap, and on FanDuel, he is extremely cheap. I think he's a cash play over there for sure. But Charbonnet and Travis Dye are really how I want to get this game. And I'm comfortable playing them against each other just because both these teams are so run heavy. Neither team is above a 41% pass rate.
So you mentioned you're comfortable getting them both in. If you had only one spot, would you go Dye over Charbonnet? Is it very close? How do you look at that?
I would play Dye because he catches more balls.
Any feel on the game itself? I have no interest in this game. I have no idea what's going to happen.
I bet UCLA.
Ugh. Chip?
It's a risky one, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like Oregon in life. I'd probably leave it at that, but they're at home. They're a pretty good team. The Pac-12 has just been so disappointing all year. I'm not going to rant about that because we're going to try to save time to get some questions at the end. Clemson, Pitt. Clemson is a 3.5-point dog. What a world. And it's definitely deserved at this point. 47.5-point total. This team cannot manufacture offense. They easily could have lost to Syracuse. Uagale is just not, it's not happening. The backfield is a mess. What is there to say about Clemson right now?
I think they're a little bit of a buy low, but they're just going up against a tough matchup here. Their offense still is like the pieces of something we might want to target for DFS. Their plays per game, it's very slow, not because they're trying to play slow. They're just super inefficient. Their pass rate's high. So there could be volume for Uagale. He's just been so bad. He's only been above 200 yards once this year. He's somewhat mobile. So I think in really big tournaments, you could play him. They're just down a lot of pass catchers too, which makes it hard for his efficiency. If you're projecting it there, you're not going to have Joseph Nada. It doesn't look like Frank Ladson's coming back. EJ Williams is out. Braden Galloway's battling a concussion and it's a serious one too. He's missed multiple weeks. We'll see if he returns. That could put Justin Ross in just like this alpha target receiving category because there's nobody else to throw to. So I'm interested in Ross and contrarian builds, or if you're just stacking up Pitt. The total is very low, so I wouldn't recommend that. And then behind these guys, with so many injuries, I'm probably going to look at Aju at the Stone Min. He's a guy that you're very familiar with. You like to bring him up. He ran a route on over 80% of dropbacks last week with so much carnage in the receiving room. He's another min price receiver you could look to. Again, they don't have anybody to throw to. They're projected to be down in this game. Even if it's not efficient, like a Stone Min receiver in this sort of game script, I think it could be worthwhile.
I've been waiting multiple years for Aju to be mentioned on the show, not by me, because I don't bring anything when I mention him. If you had to, would you go to him or would you go to the Min Purdue wide receiver?
I would play Aju barely. He projects to be the wide receiver 2 to Jackson Anthrop as like the wide receiver 4.
On the other side of this game, you mentioned it does feel kind of like a buy low spot for Clemson, but Kenny Pickett and this offense is no joke. He's got two alphas on the outside, Addison and Mack. He can really throw the ball. Abakanada, I don't know exactly what to do with the backfield. It's always a timeshare, but what do you think about Pittsburgh in a low total game? They are the favorites. Can they move the ball enough to put them in play on the DFS slate?
Yeah, they're still tough with a low total overall. They have a great offense, very passively, very fast. But Clemson, the strength of their team is still their defense. Pickett's been pretty efficient. He's mobile. He's completing 70% of his passes, 9.4 yards per attempt, over 300 yards in half of his games. Has only had one below 272. So he's been fantastic, but still just a tournament play based on the game environment. Easy to stack. Addison's your expensive play. Taysier Mack's your cheap play. Not really going on anyone else behind them. And then in the run game, Abanikanda has separated himself from Vincent Davis a little bit here, but a tough matchup, and there still will be some degree of timeshare here.
You bet Pitt in this game, did you not?
I did. I took him at -3.
Okay, so you got a good line. There you go on that. We got one game left. We'll try to talk a little FanDuel. Also, coming up next, stay tuned. MMA live before lock. I guess they're going early in the UFC today. A lot of good fights.
It's an early card.
Early card. Who know? Paul Acosta, Vittori, a lot of guys that I don't know, but Pete the Heat and Jason Floyd certainly do, and they are coming up next. But let's talk about Maryland. Let's talk about Minnesota. 4.5-point underdogs for the Terps, 53.5-point total. Credit to Minnesota. I was wrong last week. I did not think they would play well, and they absolutely did. This team finds ways at times to look somewhat impressive. Autumn Bell had quite a day. I want to talk about him, and I want to talk about Bryce Williams in the backfield. Where do you go with this Minnesota team? And then feel free to loop in Maryland.
Yeah, Minnesota, it's run game or bust. They're still just such a low volume passing attack. Tanner Morgan's certainly not in play. Autman Bell had to receive like a 45% target share last week to get his 12 targets. They might get some of their players back, like Daniel Jackson. I have no idea. So maybe his targets go down. He's just really risky at his price, not worth getting to whatsoever. They did not use a three-way committee. They basically gave Bryce Williams most of the work, and that's something that we predicted. We saw Bryce Williams handle a large workload at one point earlier in his career, but he was super efficient. So I'm not really expecting him to relinquish this unless he fumbles or something early on. Bryce Williams is in my player pool, and I think you can play him. On the Maryland side, they're somewhat interesting because they're so pass heavy and so up tempo. But Talia Tagovailoa's efficiency has plummeted a little bit since he's now lost Dante Demas and Jayshon Jones. Raheem Jarrett is still way too cheap for his target share right now. He's somebody you can play on the opposite side of like Williams. And I think you could even play him by himself based on pure target volume. But he's really the only guy I want to get to. No one else I'm interested in.
All right. Couple questions here. You mentioned this earlier in the show. Woods from OU, not expected to play, correct?
It looks like he's back playing now.
Oh,
either
no,
way, like don't play him either way.
But does that hurt Hazelwood for you, or do you not care?
No, it hurts Mims more than anyone.
Poor Marvin. Just really quick thoughts on, you've got Armstrong over on FanDuel in that Georgia Tech UVA game. You got also BC and Louisville. Any key points, top end points you want to make on those two games?
The FanDuel slate is way better than DraftKings today. All of the good games are at night, so play the DraftKings night slate. It's going to be really fun. Armstrong is a phenomenal play. The dude is averaging 400 pass yards per game. Super easy to stack with Kemp, Wicks, Keaton Thompson, Jelani Woods, or Rashawn Henry. Georgia Tech's been really fun on the other side, too. They're actually up-tempo. They're a little run heavier, but Jeff Sims has been a phenomenal dual threat if you want to run him back on the other side. Some of the other games are a little less interesting. I think Notre Dame USC, because USC is so pass heavy, they could have some interest. And Drake London is a phenomenal play anytime he's on the slate. He's had 65 targets in their last 4 games. So Drake London is just a smash play. Ohio State is a 40-point implied team total. You're playing the usual suspects over there. CJ Stroud, Trevion Henderson, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Smith and Jigba as a value play. And then Alabama's on that slate, 46 implied team total. Bryce Young going into a phenomenal matchup with clear stacking options in Mechie and Williams. Brian Robinson's a great play down there. And then in the first game on that slate, which is not on DraftKings for some reason, Boston College Louisville is a pretty high total too. Louisville implied over 30 points. You have a really cheap value play on the other side that I'm interested in Zay Flowers. It's a great FanDuel slate. I'm playing a lot over there.
Drake London really is unbelievable. Guy is just an absolute monster. It's a shame he plays at that school. All right. They're just a mess. I can't get over USC being awful. Let's see.
The FanDuel slate is so fun, guys, and play the DraftKings night slate. A lot of those games are at night, so that's going to be a really fun slate too.
And if you've got questions,
projections for it'll be up.
Look at that. He's got projections. If you got comments and you have more questions, at Matt Gajeski right on the screen. You can follow me at JazzRez DFS. Let's hit these likes over 100 before we get out of here. Best QB on the slate. I assume you would say Caleb Williams.
Yes, sir. On FanDuel, it's Armstrong.
Any bets that you want to mention that we haven't talked about within this slate?
Kent State -5. Let's ride. Golden Flashes.
Also bet that with you. Air Force -3. They are going to knock off San Diego State, who has the #1 rush defense in the country. The problem is they're going against a team that averages almost 400 yards on the ground. Daniels, that quarterback, and all the other whatever, I don't know who they are. It doesn't matter. Air Force has got people that know what they're doing. They're at home. Any team that beats Wyoming is good enough for me. Air Force is going to knock off San Diego State today. Columbi, Ezukama, Bryce Williams, or Talia Charbonnet. I don't know what that question is.
This is a 5v5?
It looks like it's a 3v2. Very bold.
I like the first one, Matt. Columbi, Ezukama, Williams.
Yeah, those are all good. Oh, okay, I see what Matt's saying. Man, I can't do it. I cannot take Colorado, but God, the Pac-12 is just very, very difficult. with that. We got UMass 35.5-point underdogs against Florida State today. And the one game I have to mention before we get out of here, Arkansas, 51-point favorites against Arkansas Pine Bluff today. That is one that probably wasn't on the calendar for most. Are you going to lay the 51?
No.
No?
I don't know anything about Pine Bluff.
I know enough to know that they probably should be more than a 51-point underdog, but they lost 90-7 against South Dakota State 2 years ago. So that's bad.
I did not know that. I'm
still
not going to do it, but man.
When you give up 90, that's bad. Hazelwood's still a good play if Woods plays.
Yeah.
UMass 35.5. No, don't do that. One last thing for us before we get out of here. If you guys are in the NBA streets and you want to sign up, get 50% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. And that's going to cover everything, college football, NFL, in addition to the NBA with that promo code Curry. It's running just for a couple more days, but we've got the link right in chat. Nightbot threw it up there. Promo code Curry. You're going to get the projections, the ownership, all the tools, boom bust, all the great things that Alex and the team have done. And again, it's not just for the NBA, NFL, college football, baseball somehow still goes on. It never ends. Last question before we get out of here. Travis Dye or Deuce Vaughn?
Deuce. It's close though.
Deuce is on the loose. Presbyterian definitely going over 80. Already bet it, my friend. The Blue Hose do not play defense, and San Diego will score in that game. Good luck, my friends. Thanks for stopping in. Hit the like button on the way out. If you have any questions or comments for me and Matt, we always love the feedback. Hit us up on Twitter. Good luck today. Enjoy the slate. We'll talk to you guys next week.